Right, so we've looked at template postures for all of the following push type things so far, including and so of course the last one was lead shoulder strike, and there's lots of variations of this, so I'm going to look at another variation today, and that's this variation. This is what I would call the Chen Ziqiang shoulder strike, although I don't want to call it, I didn't want to put that in the title because I don't want to promote him, and I don't want to get into that whole thing around Chen Ziqiang. If you don't know the story, he's quite a controversial figure. He's a very famous Chen Tai Chi master. He's quite controversial for engaging in really aggressive push hands where there's lots of talk about whether he goes too far or not. I have no problem whatsoever with people doing quite aggressive training, aggressive push hands, using lots of power. The primary problem I think I would focus on is slamming people into really hard floors, concrete floors or really hard floors where they could hurt themselves. And seen a few Chen Tai Chi people do that where I just thought, in my view, it's basically just criminal assault to do that. So I don't want to promote that. I would say the bottom line with that is if you get offered to do push hands with Chen Ziqiang, then he's going to do that. That's how he plays. So immediately just knock him on his arse, because there's plenty of videos of him where the other person could have taken him down. They could have reaped him. They just show him that they could have reaped him. Sometimes people who are much bigger than him. The key takeaway anyway is that that's how Chen Ziqiang plays. So if he offers to do push hands with you on a really hard floor, don't engage with that. Don't do that. Offer to do maybe some sparring or something like that. Or if you are going to do push hands and you're on some mats or something like that, just slam him down immediately. Just smack his legs out from under him and smash him onto the floor, because that's what he's going to do to you. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. On mats, absolutely fine. Just do it to him before he does it to you. But his techniques themselves are okay. This is a pretty good technique. He does it really well. The hitting him with the shoulder, and there's a lot to learn from this technique. And we will come back and expand on all of these postures. I've got all of that stuff filmed. It's just breaking it up into different sections at the moment. So we're just looking at the template postures. But the way that we practice this on the bag is designed very much to mimic the way that it happens in reality. And if you watch Chen Ziqiang do this, it's usually kind of chest to chest. It's not something that you're very often going to see really good quality wrestlers do for very long, or you're not going to be able to make this work probably against a really good wrestler, but it's a really great technique. So we start, as I showed before in a little bit of filming that you've just seen, by taking the weight of the heavy bag. So that's the first step in understanding this posture. Like, if there's a bit of extra weight, it can add a bit of power to it, because you'll have noticed that these shoulder strikes are not very powerful. They look much more impressive when they're integrated into other movements. But there are various different things that we can try and do to improve the power that we get out of the short range technique. So I suppose the first and most obvious one is where you hit. So particularly if you watch Chen Ziqiang, and also because he's very often shorter than the other person, his shoulder gets right into their solar plexus. So this is the principle of the power of a strike being proportional to the target that it hits. And this is very similar to the Systema parlor trick, where they do kind of lightish punches to the solar plexus. And actually anyone can do that, because it really, really hurts when you punch someone in the solar plexus. It's not like some kind of amazing secret skill learned from Cossacks in the ancient times. So if you can get that hit into that solid part right into the solar plexus, you can really amplify the effect that you get. But another thing you can do, there's various things you can do. One is like I'll demonstrate somewhere the bag is swinging in towards me, and that lets you ping with the shoulder and get a really dramatic effect. How likely it would be for someone, maybe if someone was rushing in at you, you could do that, but how likely you would get a clean shot on someone's solar plexus if they were rushing into you? You'd be pretty lucky, but you get an amazingly dramatic effect, impressive effect, a crowd wooer. But what you can do, and what Chen Ziqiang does, is he kind of encourages this like pushing into each other, so pushing into the opponent, leaning into the opponent. I think a really good wrestler, and maybe even just an amateur wrestler, would take advantage of that much more, I think, than the people he demonstrates with. But in terms of self-defense, we don't necessarily think like that. We think about, what might be useful, what might be practical, have the template posture anyway. But if you press into them and kind of encourage them to press into you, and particularly if they're heavier than you, which I think he works that really well, encourage them to kind of press their weight against you. And then what you're going to do is just pull back a little bit, create the gap, because he pretty much always uses gap Farley. I've never seen him, I think, use brace Farley, but he may do. But every video I've seen of him doing this, he uses gap Farley, and he has to manufacture that gap by pulling his shoulder back quickly and then slamming it straight back in to the solar plexus. Sometimes he adds a little bit of an extra technique or a trip or something like that. And if you watch him do it, it's a fantastic example of what we call somatic timing. So it's the natural timing of the body, and it's not a specific time. The faster you can do the movement, the faster the somatic timing is. But it's the Farley in more than one movement, so it's got to go back and then it's got to go forward. So again, this thing that we often see in each one where people are just only doing Farley in one direction, that's almost useless. That's almost useless. It's like, it's an achievement, but it's almost useless. You need to do Farley, like compound it one direction then another direction for it to be really effective. And that requires understanding somatic timing, and go back to the beginner series if you don't get that. But it's the natural timing of the body's weight as it moves very fast in one direction and changes very quickly into another direction. And in that split second, even if someone's really leaning their weight on you, remember always, like I said maybe in the previous video, even bad movement is based on the laws of physics. So when people say it's based on the laws of physics, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Bad movement is based on the laws of physics, so is good movement. But good movement utilising the laws of physics, like that, leaning against the opponent's solar plexus suddenly disappears, but all their weight is still leaning forwards, and you can do it so fast, it's faster than gravity. So as they're kind of falling in, you've already done that movement using your somatic timing to hit back in, and you've got all their weight leaning in against the posture, and that increases the impacts. So it's a really good technique, and he does it really well. So go and look at him and how he does that. Or more usefully, let's learn how to do it ourselves. So first thing to think about is, we've thought of a few things already, haven't we? But the next thing to think about is, it's not one of those techniques that really works against like a light, soft tight. You could see that before or in the previous video when I was doing the lead shoulder strike on a lighter bag. It's not like a particularly impressive move on its own anyway, but the heavier the target you're hitting, the more effects you get, the more useful effects, or certainly for an onlooker and what it looks like to them. So for example, hitting against a chest, hitting against a rib cage gets more effect than hitting against someone holding a pad or something like that. So it's really useful to do it on quite a heavy bag. And the way we do this, first of all, we want to get it so that we can do it moving around, and I'll show that a little bit later in a different video, because I've got all the postures done in different ways, like with steps or with brace Farley, a different video. I think we'll look at brace Farley in this video. But for the template off the spot posture, the first thing we want to do is take all the weight of the bag, or not all of it, but get it on our shoulder, get it balanced, and then move forward so that there's weight pushing against our shoulder. And you'll see that in a second when I play the video. But I also wanted to mention that this isn't like, it's one of those things that it's the difficulty of incredibly easy things. It's the most natural thing in the world, because it's just the body's natural timing. The body's fantastic at doing this kind of short, sharp movement, move back explosively, and then move forward in a different direction explosively. And this is one of the really important things that standing gives us. And I think one of the big problems with standing, I think I'll talk about it another time, but one of the big problems and reasons why people have trouble accepting it as a training method, even though it's a very physical training method, is that you can't always see any outcome for it. Like, people can't demonstrate an outcome that would make you think that you want to do it, but actually it's a fantastic exercise for helping to develop this. Anyway, the other thing is why it's really useful is this is one of the kinds of short power that we use. So it's the basis, for example, of doing a punch like this. If you just add a punch onto the end of the shoulder movement, and I will be demonstrating that as well. It's one of the two major kinds of short power that we use, one using somatic timing and one using articulated force. And when we look at that, I'll explain that there are some postures you can't do with either of the, you can do them with one, either articulated force, or you can do it with somatic timing, but you can't use short power with both for that technique. So you have to have both for the different techniques. So there's lots and lots of reasons why we want this posture, not just for its own sake, because it's an ace technique on its own, but it's also really useful for something else. But anyway, we start by getting that weight on the shoulder, and then we can proceed with just short movement, hit the bag. No, there's one more thing. Remember that your arm is likely to be under their arm, so you don't put your arm up when you do this. So that's why you'll see me dropping my arm, so that you can grab their torso or something like that. For the brace Farley version of the posture, which I'll just kind of introduce here, Ollie filmed a couple of examples doing it just as the template posture. You need to take all of the weight and then push without pulling back. So obviously it's less powerful. Not all brace Farley postures are less powerful than the gap Farley posture, but it's quite difficult to articulate this one back into the body without doing like a kind of ridiculously over-exaggerated movement to get a kind of phase into the body, and then it's quite difficult to transition that into the target, and that's all to do with the way that it connects to the footwork. So you can get enough power into it, but it's most useful just as like a little push, and then that allows you to disrupt the opponent's structure just fast enough to then follow on with a hit or something like that. I've got some stuff filmed doing that. The main thing to learn about the brace Farley version is what it teaches you about setting postures. And you'll feel this naturally when you do it, but it helps to have it scientifically explained, because you can then use that to build on other stuff. What happens with the gap Farley version of the lead shoulder strike is that it's kind of very, very quick, and the expansion of the force down into the feet is primarily in the front foot, so it sets on front foot dominance. So if you like, that's, we've talked about this idea of the kind of two sides of the explosive force. One is the contact point with the target, the other one being the dominant, if you like, the root, but what we call the set in this case. of how the energy goes back into the floor, and it just kind of locks the structure. But when you use brace Farley, because it's not a very powerful movement, it really relies on you shifting part of your body weight, or as much of your body weight as you can, in a very short space, rather than, for example, with the lead forearm push, you articulate that, the gap that you would use in gap Farley, you articulate that back into your body. And it's quite easy to do with a forearm push. That's really, really hard to do with the shoulder push. So you've got to compensate for that. And the way you compensate for that is just like moving the whole body weight in a short movement over to the side. And by over to the side, that means over towards the rear leg. So what you will feel, if you consciously feel for it, you'll feel the set of the posture transition from initially on the front foot over to being more on the rear foot. So the dominance of the set will change from the lead foot to the rear foot very quickly. And that's what we call a distributed set. So the set takes place not just in one go, it takes place in two separate little bits that are very closely interconnected together. And that's kind of like the science of it. And it is important to understand that kind of stuff, because it gets us away from these, well, ideas that are kind of on the right tracks, like things like kinetic chains and some of the stuff that people talk about rooting. Or I saw one discussion recently where someone was criticising the idea that power comes from the floor, and then they were replacing that with like quite a simplistic description of the kind of thing I'm talking about here. But actually the real art is much more sophisticated than that. So we have all different kinds of sets, distributed sets, for example, as in this case, and we need to learn about those. It helps us understand and solve problems, and when we're not making something work or something's not working for us, we can think about that scientifically and how we improve that in self-coaching. So here's a couple of examples anyway. Rear shoulder strikes are all pretty much the same as the lead shoulder strikes, only you swap open for close. So you use close, but you also use much more sink. So for lead shoulder, use a little bit of sink, just a tiny little bit. It's like 80% open, maybe 20-15% sink. But when you use the rear shoulder, you use significantly, maybe about 40% sink. And that's not always obvious. So or something to be aware of is when you do it as like a template posture where you just try and do it perfectly on the bag, you'll usually do it as a much bigger movement, and that will involve much more leaning forward, and you create a kind of compression set on the lead leg a little bit, which we've looked at before. Whereas, as we'll look at when I do demonstration of combinations using techniques, when you start using real power, when you start doing like combinations on the heavy bag, all of these postures get curtailed. They get fitted into combination structures whereby you've got to actually make the posture smaller. You've got to distribute the power between the whole combination, and the postures themselves get smaller. So it would be very unusual to do a really big leaning forward rear shoulder strike in a kind of practical environment, and a little bit dangerous. But the template posture is always like that. You've just got to time it better when you're kind of using it in a combination or something like that. Well, that's a little bit more of an advanced skill, but that's something you just learn through practice. It's not something you can just kind of be taught by someone and learn it. It's just constant practice. But other than that, the rear shoulder techniques all follow similar things. There's a Chen style version, if you want to call it that. There's brace Farley, there's gap Farley. So I just filmed a few examples of template postures, including stepping in.